I'm Suzanne Williams, and this is my 1934 two-door sedan. I was born in 1942 in Los Angeles, California. I've lived in Los Angeles my whole life. I got into cars at a modestly early age in the 1950s. The boy across the street had a Model A pickup that actually he was turning into a hot rod before he even had a driver's license. That spurred the interest in what is this, and maybe I ought to get a little closer to see what this is. And cars represented something other than the norm. I was probably just a little bit looking to be a rebel. I just didn't want to conform. Cars were very exciting. The guys who had the cars were more exciting because they would do things that weren't sports-oriented, which was appealing to me. My first car that I actually got to choose and own was a 1957 Thunderbird. I did not buy it new. I bought it in '69, and it became my daily driver because I didn't want a normal car to drive. I still own that Thunderbird, and I never repainted it. I just kept it running really well. The second car that I've always wanted was a 1934 two-door sedan with a chop top. That just visually, to me, was the ultimate hot rod. So one day in 1973, the garage door was open, and I hear this noise coming, and so I stopped to look, and there was a 1934 two-door sedan setting really high like a gas altered in the back, just raging sound. And I look, and this 34 drives by, and just as the guy's driving by in it, he stops the car, looks over, and yells, "Is that for sale?" And at the time, we had Bob's 1932 Roadster body setting in the garage, and he's pointing at the Roadster body, and I go, "No, it's not. Is that for sale?" And I'm pointing at the 34 sedan he's driving, and he goes, "Well, maybe, could be," which meant, in my mind, yes. So that's really how this car came about. The 34 had a 283. The engine was set up with chrome rings, and they never seated. And it also had a Holley carburetor, so when we would go out driving in it, it would flood out, and then it'd choke itself out, and then we'd have to stop. And I always carried a giant roll of paper towels with me, and I'd get out, open the hood, sop up the fuel that was all collected in the carburetor. So it really wasn't all that fun to drive, but in a way it was fun to drive. So my dream was always to have a chop top on a 34 two-door. In 1988, there's a guy named Rick Permain, who was a British guy. He came with his friend Nick, and while Bob and Nick were messing around, I discovered that Rick had the ability to chop a top, and we finally made an arrangement to chop the top on this car in Nick's driveway, and I believe he lived in Burbank. And the thing was like color sanded, kind of a root beer brown, and it had, you know, primer from the chop, and it was a pretty rough looking thing, but the body on this car is perfect. The fenders have never been taken off this car. When I redid the car finally in '96, I had the car painted two-stage duochrome paint. I had just the base coat mixed to match dark gray primer because I wanted a primer car, but I didn't want primer, and we just left the top coat off. So it's got a unique kind of finish to it. It looks primer, but it doesn't quite. I lowered the back with lowering blocks, and I had I think a 4-inch drop bell axle I-beam put in, and then in '96 I got a '96 Chevy small block crate motor. Believe it or not, it's just a stock motor, and this car is so light and the engine so fresh, you know, working behind the Muncie transmission and the Hurst shifter, you know, the 4-speed. I mean, this car just goes as fast as you really want it to. And And so I had the upholstery done also at the same time. And I have to say, the upholsterer named Willie Sofer did the best job ever because he did exactly what I wanted. I drew the headliner pattern for Willie, and I have a painting I did that has lightning bolts coming to the center in the same way. And in a way, that's kind of what inspired me to do my headliner like that. As I grew up, I had a hard time, let's say, thinking I needed to conform to what everybody else was doing. I somehow just wanted to be me and be different, and that seemed to end up being kind of a driving force, to be an individual and just have everything I do reflect on me as doing it right, doing it wrong. I grew up in a time of you got quality products and you fix them. So I started just repairing things because I didn't like things that weren't perfect or as perfect as could be. So anything I ever had, if it broke, I would repair it. As I grew into needing to do something eventually, art became the priority. I went to Art Center, I studied automotive for a year. I eventually switched to packaging because I wanted more skills, and I also studied industrial design. And then I ended up wanting to be an oil painter, which in a way was my goal all along. And so I taught myself how to oil paint. But I paint by only using a brush and the paint. So I hand edge everything. I do not use masking. I do not use an airbrush. Anyway, I found working in offices difficult because of people, and so I ended up trying to freelance. Bob was working for Ed Roth already, and I would go down there a lot, and then Roth found out I was an artist, and he wanted me to work there also. So I worked at Roth Studios for a couple of years. So I worked on some decal designs. I did a lot of lettering there because I was really skilled at lettering. I worked on a catalog which actually turned out to be too professional as far as the skill level of advertising for Roth. It wasn't rat-finky enough, which I totally understood. So it never got used, but little excerpts and parts of it did. And then I worked on Chopper's Magazine. And Chopper's Magazine was the first motorcycle magazine, or, alternative bike magazines that there was. Jake and I physically put the magazine together. Howard did all the photography. Sadly, this is what caused Roth to have to go out of business eventually, because none of the car magazines would take his ads anymore because he was promoting the motorcycle gang lifestyle. Is kind of what was the feeling at the time. Right now, I own a 1913 Model T Runabout, but the bottom line reason that I wanted a Model T was I wanted to see what it was like to experience early motoring. And the Model T, was the car of the people, the most common one, and I wanted to learn how to drive one because it has a totally different setup than a modern car. Also, at one time, I got it in my head I wanted to learn to drive a sprint car because Bob and I and a bunch of friends would always go to Ascot Speedway out in Gardena to the sprint car races every Friday night. We did that for as long as it was open. I decided I wanted to get a sprint car and I wanted to learn how to drive one. I bought this sprint car, but it was a pretty decent looking body. I was going to put a DeSoto engine in it, and so I was looking for an engine, taking my time, doing a little at a time as the money was there, as you do with builds. And Indian Dunes got closed because some idiot decided to sue Indian Dunes because they ran into a gigantic red road grader that ended up closing down Indian Dunes, which also ended my interest. Everybody knows me, Suzanne Williams, is married to Robert Williams. I don't think people realize, though, that as far as cars and art, he didn't really have that much to do with the direction of me either doing it or wanting to do it. I already was an artist studying art, and I already had hot rodding interests through boyfriends, and before I met met him. I still live here, and I still like driving, and there's nothing better than being able to drive and drive fast.